Okay, in this example we're going to walk through a full example turn. We're going to start with a game in progress, and as you can see here we've got the village side of the map, we've got a standard game that we're playing to 51 points or overrun, and you can see the damage deck, command deck. I've got an open hand shown for the US units, US player, I'm sorry, and then the US reserves deck is right there. There's some rear line artillery on the US side, and there's the German open hand. Got some German units that are already in play, including a Tiger tank behind a Panther that's damaged and in fact immobilized. Got some infantry in these village buildings, a German rear line artillery unit, the German reserves deck, and we've got reserves entry points on the columns of column 1 for the US and column 9 for the Germans. So typical game, and we're going to start with the beginning of the turn. So every player rolls initiative, each player rolls initiative at the beginning of the turn. The highest number wins, and in this case the US wins initiative. You track it with this initiative marker, and there's a space to track it around the score sheet, which I'm not showing at the moment, so off to the side. But so I'm going to keep it here so we can see that the US is the initiative winner. And you would re-roll any ties. Now, the movement phase, you skip it on turn 1. We're already in a game in progress. Let's say we're at turn 4. So we will have some movement here. So movement, and really everything in every phase, is done first by the initiative winner. So sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. Now in this case, the US has the opportunity to move these units in play, and I believe that I'm going to keep these units where they are. So as the US player, I'm done with my ground unit movement, and then it's time for the Germans to move. Now this Panther is immobilized, so the German player can't move it. However, he could move up this rifle squad, and again on the quick reference sheet you can see the movement rates. Infantry in general are 2. And they may sprint by discarding a command card from your hand, burning it, for an extra space. And tanks move 1, and they may be pushed for an additional movement rate of 1 if you discard a command card, similar to sprinting infantry. So I moved up the Tiger. I'm going to keep the mortar squad back here, this is an 8cm mortar squad. It keeps them back here kind of protected and out of line of sight of the US units. MG42 is in this intact village house, and he's in a pretty good position for spotting or targeting infantry directly if he would like. And so we are going to go forth to the next phase. Now if there was any opportunity fire, a unit moving adjacent to an enemy unit, we would resolve that here in the movement phase, but we don't have any of that. So now we go to the commitment phase. This is where new units are brought into play. Now again, the initiative winner does this first, and from the player's hand, which I'm showing you here, the player will commit new ground units into play first. So I'm going to commit, as the US player, a mortar squad right behind that house ruin. And in addition, I have this aircraft that I can commit into play, but not quite yet. We go to the next step for that. So first, the German player will now commit new ground units into play. As you can see, the Germans do not have any new ground units to commit into play from their hand. So it's back to the US to commit new air units into play and declare their flight paths. Now aircraft, if you've seen the previous tutorial about flight paths, you basically commit a flight path, which is any straight line path across the map, where the aircraft will fly during the combat phase, and that basically means that the path is not executed until combat. So as you can see there, I've brought in this P-38 as the US player to the edge of the map in row B. And when I bring him in, I need to look at turns of flight on the card, which is 3 for the P-38. So I mark that with a turns of flight counter. That will count down at the end of the turn. Now the Germans also have some aircraft, so this is one of the cases where it's not the best to have initiative when you're committing aircraft, because the Germans in this case can respond to that commitment and potentially attack the aircraft you've just committed. So that P-38 might have been intended to go on a ground attack run. However, now he's got to deal with a measurement. So the German player will commit this Messerschmitt, which is in for just one turn, with a fighter ace card, which gives the pilot a bonus to attack. So the German's Messerschmitt is placed at row B as well. So with that, we're done with the commitment of aircraft. And now if there were any other command cards to play or any other commitment phase functions, you would do those now. For example, you can move self-propelled guns to and from the front line at reserves entry points if you want. And some of these are and then there's some command cards that are done in the commitment phase. For example, withdrawal or a host of other cards. So if you want to do any of those functions, you do them now. But if not, we move on to the combat phase. Combat phase is where most of the action occurs, in fact all of the action. This is where we declare aircraft and artillery targets, all other targets after that, and then we alternate resolving attacks in the order of initiative winner first, until all attacks this turn are resolved. So here you're going to see a lot of rules in action. I've tried to make this example cover a lot of different things that are covered in the rulebook. So now we look at initiative winner, US player, to declare all of their aircraft and artillery targets. Now the US player does have a howitzer on the rear line. He'll have to be spotted to fire anywhere on the front line. So that's one of the targets that that's one of the attacks the US will declare. The way we do this is we use any infantry unit that has the line of sight to a target as a spotter. So in this case, I'm going to use my rifle squad to spot for the howitzer as the US player firing on this immobilized Panther. So let's see if we can get some more damage on this Panther. Now, the howitzer is marked as the targeting and attacking unit. So the targeting pair is as so. That spotter covers this attack. Now if I had other artillery, I could stack that same fire onto that same target with one spotter. However, if I have multiple targets, one to each artillery piece, for example, I would need multiple spotters to each of those associated targets. Now one thing that can happen that I want to mention is, say that the rifle squad were destroyed before this attack occurs, that attack would no longer happen. So keep that in mind, because damage in the combat phase is instantaneous. Units can be taken out before they execute their actions. So that attack, that artillery attack is declared. Now I also have to declare my aircraft attack. Now I'll notice that this Messerschmitt is coming into play, and I don't really like Messerschmitts as the US player. So I will take my P-38 and we'll have a little dogfight over the map against the Messerschmitt ace. Now the US artillery and aircraft attacks are all declared. We move on to the Germans to declare their aircraft and artillery attacks. The Germans have a flak gun which may fire against any aircraft regardless of where they're flying over, where their flight path is. So for example, some units like a tank with an MG that can hit aircraft, that tank on the front line can only fire at that aircraft if the aircraft flies over the front line, not if the aircraft flies over the rear line, for example. But a flat gun can reach an aircraft target wherever they fly, so they're pretty deadly. So this flat gun is going to fire at that P-38 that's coming into play. The other aircraft attack is the German attack of the Messerschmitt against the Lightning. So those two aircraft are firing at each other. So I've marked those with targeting counter pairs. And those help you track when these targets are complete, when these attacks are complete. Now, we declare all other targets. So now we're looking at land-based or ground-based targets that are non-artillery. So we look at primarily the front line here. So we've got a couple of options here, actually many options here as the US player. The rifle squad could spot for this mortar squad that just came into play. The tank could fire at the Panther direct, and I think that's one thing that the US player should do. So the tank is firing at this Panther. And the rifle squad, we're going to check and see if he can see into the ruins to fire directly at this other rifle squad, this German rifle squad that moved up. And you can see on this house ruin tile that the unhighlighted edge on the west side means that potentially that squad can be targeted directly in the ruins. So we check line of sight by simply drawing a straight line from center dot to center dot. And in this case it does not cross the red corner of that house ruin, and it doesn't cross any blocking feature of any tile in between. The village fountain in this case does not block any line of sight across it. So this rifle squad will fire on the German rifle squad directly. So we mark that with a sighting and target counter that's paired up. And what else? The sniper could potentially fire at the squad or some other infantry target. But in this case, the sniper cannot see into the same ruined building because of his line of sight is blocked. You can tell that because he's firing outward through the green, which is okay. He can see out from the church ruin, but he can't see into the highlighted edge of this building ruin over here across the street. So the squad is not visible to him, and he will not be firing on them. So what else could the sniper do? Well, the sniper, any infantry unit can be used to spot for artillery or mortars, and that's what he's going to do in this case. So I'm going to really focus my fire as the US player on this Panther. So the sniper is going to be used as a spotter. Line of sight out through the green is fine to the Panther, and we mark that the mortar squad will fire on this space. Now his fire affects everything in the space. If there were an infantry unit stacked with the tank, that would also be affected if he hit. So that's how we do it. Now the mortar squad firing in directly does not need a direct line of sight. He's being spotted and called in, similar to a rear line artillery attack. So we mark that attack, and all US ground-based attacks are declared. So now we go to the Germans to declare their ground-based attacks. So in this case we've got this immobilized Panther. He is defending himself by firing back at this Sherman. The Tiger, however, cannot fire at the Sherman because line of sight would go through a friendly unit, in this case a German unit. So the Tiger will not have a target this turn unless something were here, or unless he were trying to attack this building here and destroy the building, which he doesn't need to do. So there's no attack from this Tiger this round. The MG42 team can see out through this intact house, through the green edge. However, does he have any targets? Let's see. Firing into the church ruin is not going to be possible because that green highlighted edge blocks line of sight into that tile. So he cannot target either of these infantry inside of that ruin. However, let's see if he can fire at this tank. At the rifle squad in the same space as the Sherman. And we check line of sight. He fires out through the green and to the squad. Now we check range because he's a little far away. Let's see if he's got range. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's at maximum range, but he is within range, so that is a legal target. So that's what the MG42 will do. He will fire at the rifle squad that is stacked with the tank. Now, one benefit of the US player stacking that rifle squad with the tank, the squad gets the defense bonus of the tank, some shielding from the tank, -2. So in this case of a Sherman, 5 minus 2 is 3. That squad gets a 3 defense just by moving with the tank. Okay, so this other rifle squad does have a line of sight out. We've already checked that for the US. He will fire at the rifle squad stacked with the tank. Now, another option I could have done as the German player is spot this space for the mortar squad instead of attacking their squad directly. So I'm contemplating that as the player. The mortar would affect everything in the space. However, it's easier for me to hit the squad with 4 attack rolls from the MG42. So that's what I want to do as the German player. I will keep my attack as is. Now, you can change your mind. You can keep moving these targeting counters around and change what you want to do, as long as you don't move past this step in combat. So once you start alternate resolving attacks, the only way to change what you're doing is to use a card like this, Redirect Fire, where you can change the target of one of your units. So for example, if this MG42 team takes out that rifle squad, I may want to take another look at what this other rifle squad is doing. I could play this card and change my targets. Okay, so with that, all ground-based targets are declared for both players. So the next thing we do in combat is we alternate resolving attacks. The initiative winner chooses the first attack to resolve, and then players alternate until the rest of them are resolved. So we have a lot of targeting counters here, and a lot of options for which attack to execute first. So US player will decide, in this case, to fire the Sherman first. The Sherman is being targeted, so I want to make sure that that fire occurs. I could also choose to fire the Lightning. The P-38 is also a vulnerable target. He's being targeted by Messerschmitt and the flat gun, either one. But in this case, I want to really focus on taking out this Panther. I'm going to fire the Sherman first before the Panther can fire and potentially take it out. Now since this Panther is immobilized, part of the damage effect says opposing units receive bonus 2 to attack this unit, and there's a penalty of defense on the Panther. So maybe it's in a vulnerable position or whatever, but his defense is now a 5 instead of a 7. So that's significant. So his current endurance is 10 because of the damage card. If I can take him out, then I'm doing well as a US player. So let's see. Sherman attack, 10 with the main gun or higher. In this case I rolled a 9, sum on 2d10. So I rolled attack and I missed. I needed a 10, I rolled a 9. I flip over that my attack against this Panther is complete from the Sherman. Now it's the German player's turn to choose an attack to resolve. This Panther is very vulnerable, so in this case the German player is going to choose to fire the Panther at its previously declared target, which is back at the Sherman. So in this case I look at the vehicle attack value for the Panther's main gun. I need a 10 or better as the German player. I roll an 18. An 18 is a special attack roll. It's a very high roll. What that means is I double intensity before adding the damage index of that weapon, which is a 7. So now I'm going to roll to see how well placed the shot was. 7 is a good shot. I double that to 14. Add 7, that's 21 points on the Sherman. 21 minus the defense of the tank of 5 is 16 points. 16 points is above the full endurance of the Sherman. Sherman is destroyed outright. What happens to the crew? The tank crew's fate is determined by the intensity roll of the destroying shot. In this case, 7 or higher, according to the quick reference, means that the crew is also destroyed with that shot. So the Panther just took out that Sherman in a single shot and erupted in flames. So both of these units are removed, and the German player, if you're playing a standard game, would receive 16 total points, 14 and 2. So that attack is complete. We flip over the 11. Any other attacks at the Sherman do not matter at this point. This is where the German player might consider redirecting their fire. For example, if there was another attack at the Sherman. In this case there is not, so not a big deal. However, that rifle squad that was getting the shielding of that tank is no longer receiving that shielding. So they're pretty vulnerable all of a sudden, and they have 2 attacks heading at them. Now it's back to the US player to resolve one of their next attacks. And I think the next thing that I would do as the US player is fire this P-38 Lightning at the Messerschmitt. Now these flight paths are now executing. So if you can imagine it, the Messerschmitt is flying over the map, the P-38 is also flying over the map. They're firing at each other, as we've previously declared. The Lightning is also receiving a flat gun attack at him. So we've got a lot going on in the air. So, US player's turn. They've got the chance to take out a Messerschmitt. Let's see what happens. The US player chooses any 2 weapons to fire that can affect the target. In this case, I have 2 weapons, the Hispano 20 mil and the 50 cal M2s that can affect aircraft, U.S. player will fire both of those at the Messerschmitt. So this dogfight occurs. I need a 10 or better, and I get 3 attack rolls because of my rate of fire on that Hispano. 10 or better with each roll, resolving damage each time I hit. 4 and 2 is a 6, that's a miss. Second roll. 8 and 6 is a hit, and I'm going to roll intensity on D10 and add the damage index of the weapon, the Hispano. 1 and 2 is 3, minus 0 defense is down, taking this BF 109 down to 4. So 7 down to 4 means that there is, in fact, a damage effect. We look at the aircraft damage effect, which in this case is evasive maneuver. And in fact, it affects his attack this turn. So for one turn, he cannot attack. That damage card gets applied immediately. We remove his planned attack because of the damage card. So for this turn, he's doing an evasive maneuver at this point, and his attack goes away. Now, we go ahead and roll the final roll of the Hispano. 9 and 1 is a 10. That's barely a hit. Remember, he's at 4 temporarily, or actually permanently at this point. 4 plus 2 is 6, and that is going to be 6 off of 4, as there's no defense. That's enough to take him out. Now, in the case of an aircraft being destroyed, the pilot is also destroyed with the aircraft, which is how we handle it. So, this fighter ace just got taken out. The U.S. player would receive 13 total points, 11 and 2. Now, we mark that his attack is complete. His flight path has been executed, so this is basically flying over the map at this point. Now remember, that flat gun is still going to fire at it, so we'll have that chance here in a second for the German player. And now we go to the next attack of the German player. In this case, the German player is going to use the MG42 team to fire at its previously declared target of the rifle squad. So 12, firing to 12. I roll 4 times, 2d10 attack, 12 or better to hit, 6 is a miss. 13 is a hit. 1d, 3 and 2 is 5, off of minus 0 defense is going to be 5 points directly on that rifle squad. So he's down from 15 down to 10, and we mark that with a temporary damage counter. So the best way to use these is to place the orientation of the counter number that's applicable with the orientation of the unit card. So he's down to 10. We've got 2 more attack rolls, I believe. 8 and 1 is a 9, that's a miss. 8 and 4 is a 12, that's 1 more hit. 8 and 2 is 10 points. Now, remember, if he were still with the tank, if the tank were surviving, some of that damage would be taken by the tank, but that's not the case anymore. And so the 10 points directly go to the rifle squad, taking out the squad. There's no need to draw a damage card if you take out the unit outright. So in this case, we take him off the board, and the German player will receive 6 more points. Now, the other attack, in fact, is no longer necessary. Now, if you wanted to play redirect fire to change your target, you could do so as the German player. And I don't believe he's going to do that just because he can't really see any other infantry. These infantry are shielded or blocked as far as line of sight. So he's going to hold on to that card. But we do remove the card. We remove the attack of the squad at this point. So this attack was also removed. The squad was going to fire into that ruin. That doesn't happen. And the 12 is done. Temporary damage counters go away, and we're starting to clean up the attacks here. Now, what else do we have going on? The German player is done. We move back to the US player to resolve its next attack. US player will fire the 105mm howitzer. Remember this, the squad was spotting for that howitzer. So we're going to see if the howitzer can take out this immobilized Panther. So Firing at a vehicle, I need a 13 or better to hit. However, it's immobilized. I get a bonus of 2. So now I need an 11 or better to execute this artillery fire. 7 and 5 is going to be enough to hit. That's a 12. 10 damage index from that 105mm shell is added to an intensity roll. 5 is the intensity roll. Remember, he has a reduced defense because of this immobilization. 5 is taken by the defense of the Panther. It would have been 7. And in this case, 10 points get directly through to the Panther. That is enough to take the Panther out. The Panther had 10 points exactly remaining, and now we don't really worry too much about this mortar squad attack, unless there was another unit in the same space. So we're gonna just remove that attack, unless we were to redirect fire. So the howitzer fires on this Panther that's immobilized and takes it the rest of the way out. Now what happens to the tank crew? Again, crew survival, look at the quick reference. 4 to 6, the crew survives damaged and may actually continue to fight as infantry or be moved into another tank that's committed. Now in this case, the damage effects, we draw a damage card for the crew. We get 18 points for the US. And this crew is going to suffer some additional damage of D10. He's already at 5. The 9 actually ends up taking them all the way out. So that's just the luck of the damage card draw. And in this case, the crew is also actually destroyed. So 2 more points for the US. And we're at 47 and 48 for the US and German player respectively regarding score. Again, the objective in this standard game is 51 points or overrun. This spot has been executed. We can remove that. And now we go on to the remaining German attack, which is going to be the flat gun firing at the P-38. So the flat gun is going to get 1 shot at the P-38. He needs a 13 or better to hit. And this flat gun, as I'm going to show you, is off the board over here. He's going to fire. 10 and 1 is 11. That is a miss. So flat gun's attack is complete. And now we go back to the US. Are there any other attacks? And I believe there is not, because that mortar squad doesn't need to attack anymore. The Panther is gone. Now again, redirect fire could have changed his target, even spotted to, for example, the building right here and potentially taken out the MG42 or whatever. But in this case, I'm sorry, taking out the building, which could damage the MG42. But in this case, we are now done with all of the previously declared targets. And with that, we're done with the combat phase. Now we move on to the draw phase. Each player draws 1 command card. In this case, the US draws veteran soldiers, Germans draw field camouflage, and then you get a choice of 2 additional cards. The US will draw from their reserves deck 2 additional cards, and they get a LMG team and an LMG team. And the Germans will draw from their reserves deck, and they're going to draw 2 cards as well, a rifle squad and a pilot. That goes into each player's hands. We're done with the draw phase. Now we go ahead and go to the end of the turn step. This is really kind of a cleanup step. End of the turn is all about removing those temporary counters that we were using. Any temporary damage gets removed, so the units will actually recover back to either the damage value if they were below that but not destroyed, or up to the full endurance value if they were between the damage point and the full endurance, had they taken a couple points of damage, for example. So, any other effects that we need to count down? Yes, there's one, and that's this turns of flight. Turns of flight is counted down for every aircraft remaining in play, and if that count would equal 0, you remove the aircraft from play and put it under your reserves deck. In this case, the P-38 just came in. We count 3 down to 2 for their turns of flight, and next turn they will commit to a new flight path and have potentially a new target. And with that, we are done with the end of turn, and we would move on to the next turn at this point. With a very close game, the Germans would potentially move up and try to take out some of these infantry with this tiger. But what we had going on there was basically 2 tanks and some artillery destroying each other, and so that worked out pretty well for both sides. It was pretty destructive for both sides. And that's the end of this full turn example.